The walls of Arthur's room had become a fortress of his own making. For months, the curtains remained drawn tight, creating a perpetual twilight that mirrored the heavy, gray fog in his mind. To Arthur, the world outside was a place of noise and exhausting expectations, a place where he no longer felt he belonged. He spent his days anchored to his bed or a single chair, the silence of the house pressing against him until even the simple act of standing up felt like an impossible marathon. The shift began not with a grand epiphany, but with a small, rhythmic sound, a persistent tap-tap-tap against the glass of his bedroom window. At first, Arthur ignored it, pulling the blankets higher over his head. But the sound returned the next morning, and the one after that. Eventually, driven more by a flicker of annoyance than curiosity, Arthur stood up and cracked the window open just an inch. A small sparrow with a bright amber chest and quick, intelligent eyes was perched there. It didn't fly away in fear, instead, it tilted its head, observing Arthur as if it had been waiting for him to finally show his face. The air that rushed through the crack was cool and smelled of rain and distant grass, a sharp contrast to the stale, recycled air of the room. The next day, Arthur was ready. He moved with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time, crumbling a small piece of sourdough bread onto the outer ledge before retreating behind the glass. He watched, breathless, as the bird landed and claimed the gift. By the following week, the window was thrown wide open. Arthur began to talk. At first, it was just whispered greetings, but soon he was narrating his life, telling the bird about the books he used to read and the dreams he had tucked away. The sparrow became his silent confessor, chirping softly in the gaps of Arthur's sentences. Arthur began setting an alarm for dawn, no longer wishing to sleep the day away. He wanted to be awake and waiting. Every morning, when the familiar flutter of wings reached his ears, Arthur found his lips curving into a genuine, effortless smile. Then came the Tuesday when the world went quiet again. Arthur sat by the open window, his piece of bread ready, but the sparrow did not arrive. An hour passed, then two. The sun climbed higher, casting light into the corners of the room that Arthur usually kept dark. Panic, rather than the old lethargy, began to stir in his chest. He worried about hawks, about storms, or that the bird had simply grown tired of him. Driven by a sudden, frantic need to find the only creature that had reached him in his darkness, Arthur did the unthinkable. He walked to his front door, turned the heavy lock, and stepped out onto the porch. The sunlight was blinding, but he didn't retreat. He wandered into his long-neglected front yard, eyes scanning the branches of the oak trees. "He's not in that tree, Arthur, I already looked," a voice called out. Arthur startled, seeing his neighbor, Clara, standing by the fence. He hadn't spoken to her in nearly a year. She smiled kindly, leaning on a garden hoe. "The little amber chest? I saw him flying toward the park earlier this morning. He looked like he was on a mission." Arthur felt a strange rush of relief, not just because the bird was safe, but because he was standing on his lawn, talking to another human being. Clara didn't ask where he had been. She simply pointed to a row of wilting flowers near his porch. "You know, those hydrangeas are thirsty. I remember you used to have the best garden on the block. If you're looking for your friend, you might as well stay out here for a bit. He'll find you easier if you're in the light." Arthur took a tentative step toward the garden hose. That afternoon, the search for the bird turned into an hour of weeding. The next day, it turned into a trip to the local nursery to buy fresh soil. Slowly, the walls of his room were replaced by the boundary of his garden. He began to mingle with other neighbors, sharing tips on tomatoes and complaining about the heat. He found that the more he moved his body and felt the soil under his fingernails, the more the fog in his mind began to thin. He was no longer waking up for the bird alone. He was waking up for the life he was rebuilding. Weeks later, Arthur was sitting at a small wrought iron table in the center of his blooming garden. He had a steaming mug of coffee in one hand and a plate with a thick slice of buttered toast in the other. The sun was warm on his neck, and he felt a profound sense of peace. Suddenly, a familiar blur of brown and amber feathers swooped down from the roof. The sparrow landed directly on the edge of his plate, bold and demanding as ever. Without waiting for Arthur to offer a crumb, the bird hopped forward, grabbed a large corner of the toast, and began a comical tug-of-war to pull it away. Arthur watched his little best friend struggle with the oversized prize, and a deep, hearty laugh bubbled up from his chest. A sound that echoed clearly through the neighborhood, signaling to the world that he was finally, truly back.
If you want more life stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe.